Hello everybody and welcome to NQA's webinar on ISO 45001-2018, which is the Occupational Health and Safety Management Standard. This is a back to basics webinar, just reviewing the structure of the system and the standard requirements, and we'll give you an overview of the overall requirements and the clauses and the various applications as we go through. My name is Terry Fisher. I'm the Principal Assessor here at NQA for Occupational Health and Systems, and I look forward to answering your questions as we go. So just to give you a little introduction to NQA as an organisation, we obviously provide certification services and also training services. As you can see from the slide there, it covers all disciplines from quality, aerospace, automotive, environment, energy and sustainability, health and safety, information resilience, food safety, risk management, and medical devices. We run a range of courses throughout the UK, as we are UK based, but we do have global coverage for all locations internationally. Just a quick summary there. We'll have approximately a 60-minute webinar. You can ask questions in the chat box. There'll also be a Q&A at the end, and the recording of the webinar will be circulated shortly after, and it'll also be recorded so you can link into it directly there and re-listen at your leisure and recap on any items that you want to. What we'll learn is the overview of the structure and of the standard and the Annex SL framework, the key concepts and benefits of ISO 45001, including the potential for integration with other management ISO systems, some practical guidance for the most complex causes within the standard, how to plan and provide evidence, and including addressing worker participation and how that can be demonstrated. Since the introduction of ISO 45001-2018, this standard has progressively been integrated into organisations' management systems or used as a standalone framework for companies. So it can be used individually for occupational health and safety across a global platform, or it can also be integrated with other ISO standards which use a similar system to the Annex SL and a similar framework. So therefore, it can fit in very nicely, and it's been designed to be integrated into other ISO management system standards. We will, within this webinar, reflect on the framework of the standard and its requirements, and obviously confirm the relevance to organisations and how they provide a structured improvement in OHS performance over time. Based on feedback that we receive from clients and in preparation to audits, etc., one of the biggest challenges within an organisation can be knowing where the information is within your management system, within your organisation. And that's why we try and contact clients several weeks beforehand, make arrangements, we send out audit plans and do as much preparation and planning as we can prior to audits being undertaken. It enables clients to plan resources and availability of other individuals, because we don't expect necessarily just one individual within an organisation to know everything. And we can also use those audit plans for your own resource planning and getting that structure and that detail scheduled out across the audit duration. Because not all audits are a single day, some of them can be multiple days, and obviously you may need support from other members of the organisation and your colleagues. Within the structure of ISO 45001, there's various things that you'll see. for those of you that have got availability of a copy of the full standard. So just for clarity, sections 1 to 3 are in reference to the standard itself. So they're not auditable items in terms of an assessment and for certification. Clauses 4 to 10 are the inclusive clauses of the structure that are audited. However, it's very useful for you to understand how the standard is written. So the terms and definitions can be very useful, the normative references, and the interpretation of how the standard should be applied. But that's purely when it talks about scope in that reference, it's talking about the application of the standard itself as an international standard. Scope is also a requirement within clause 4 within the context of the organisation, and we'll touch on that later on. So if you imagine these clause sections as chapters of a book, so from clauses 4 to 10 inclusive, they're the things that will be audited against. The concepts and benefits of ISO 45001. It uses risk-based thinking, so it's not just about trying to do everything all at once, it's about applying risk to that and being able to set priorities. It's about working with the workers within the organisation, and the term workers is an all-inclusive term that's used because it may include direct employees, it may include visitors and contractors, etc. So it's an all-inclusive term that the standard uses, as opposed to just employees, because we need to protect all workers and potentially members of the public, etc., depending on your organisation and the type of activities involved. It's looking to create and improve culture change within the organisation. It's proactive in risk management. It's looking at a systematic approach to reduce culpability and increase protection. And it helps to demonstrate a proven commitment from the leadership, delivering actions and improvements over time, which will enhance performance and reduce risk. So culture change and improved OHS performance is a key perspective of what the ISO standards are trying to deliver. So in section 4, it considers this in a very systematic way, as you would expect. The organisation must look at the context of the organisation. So what is its internal issues that it's got to do? What are the external issues that are impacting and affecting that? What are the activities and the purpose of the organisation? All these things seem quite obvious when we talk about them, but in terms of a management system, unless we actually look at these in some detail and consider these appropriately, it can be difficult to understand why things are happening in the way that they've been designed or whatever, or if there are changes needed. And understanding the context of an organisation is a key requirement of the ISO management standards, as it also includes development and changes within that context as organisations change depending on maturity, customer base, service delivery, etc. Various things are always impacting on an organisation as to why it needs to do and deliver its requirements. Section 2 looks at the interested parties. So in terms of occupational health and safety, workers are the key core requirement in terms of interested parties, supported by legal and regulatory requirements, and also commercial considerations, etc. So the interested parties, understanding who you're delivering various things for, what you're doing that for, and how you do that is a core process within the management system standard. Section 5 looks at leadership. So the strategy, the policy, the roles, responsibilities and participation of interested parties appropriately within that, and the resources within the organisation. The whole of the management system is designed to deliver the key requirements of the policy commitments as laid out in the ISO management requirements, and also to deliver the strategy of the business to meet the business's own requirements in terms of what it wants to deliver, and importantly, in relation to occupational health and safety, how it wants to deliver that in a safe and controlled manner. So all these things, the strategy change or whatever, can have a big influence on the context, because if the business changes a strategy, it may include process change, it may include additional resources, it may include doing something completely new that's never been done before within that organization. So it's really important to understand the interrelationship between all those key elements: strategy, policy, roles, responsibilities, and the participation of everyone within the organization to deliver that. Section 6 looks at the planning. So that's the hazard identification, the risks and opportunities, the legal and other requirements, sometimes referred to as compliance obligations, the occupational health and safety objectives of the organisation, what it wants to deliver, what's the plan for delivering those improvements over time. Section 7 of the structure looks at resources, the competence, the awareness, communications and documented information. So this is all elements of the ISO management system. And also in there is the operational control in section 8. So section 8 covers operational control in 8.1 and also emergency preparedness in clause 8.2. Within section 8, you've got the hierarchy of control, you've got change management, you've got procurement, you've got contractor control and emergency preparedness. In section 9, the management standards looks at internal audit process, the management review, the incident and corrective action processes within the organisation, the improvement objectives and delivering that continual improvement process, and making sure that all these things work together collectively to deliver the benefit that's identified by the organisation and by the standard. As I mentioned at the start, the scope is a requirement, so an organisation needs to define its scope. This is different to the scope that's referenced in section 1 of the standard itself. For those of you who've got full access to a full copy, the scope of the management system is how the organisation is going to apply it to its operations and the various things. So it must consider the leadership, the workers and interested parties, and it must include the context. And then when you've considered all those, you can then define the scope of applicability of the management standard to the operations and the organisation. Context of the organisation. Well, this is obviously unique to every organisation. You've got lots of different types of organisation, and you can see from the slide that we've got some examples there. All of these very different types of organisations, probably with very different needs and requirements, but there may be similarities in terms of workers and various things within each organisation. There will be common threads throughout. But you can see from all those examples, the context would be very different depending on each type of organisation that the management standards being applied to. And the scope of the management system defines the boundaries of applicability to the OHS management system, and that's got to be written, it's got to be documented, and it's got to be available for us to assess to make sure that we're looking at applying the assessment appropriately to the relevant scope of the management system as defined by yourselves. In terms of the context of the organisation, where does it, people often ask, where does it say in the standard that 4.1 and 4.2, which are the actual clause references, numerical references, has to be documented? The answer is it doesn't. But a lot of organisations do choose to put some documented information together in relation to this, not to just aid the assessment process, but also to aid the organisation, because it's very important that the organisation understands why things are being done and who is it being done by and who's it being done for, and what's the expectation of delivery at the output of that. So in terms of a process, who we're doing it for, who's going to actually do it, how we're going to deliver that, and how we're going to confirm that we deliver that can all be somewhat documented in various ways, shapes and forms within different types of organisation. So although the standard doesn't require this thing to be documented, a lot of organisations choose to create supporting information to demonstrate what they've considered. Where it isn't documented, we would assess context in terms of having leadership discussions, talking to senior management, talking to interested parties, including the workers and the various things available at locations, etc., and confirming that things that were being told and things that were being explained to us are confirmed in the process and it's understood throughout the organisation. So context is really important. Another question that's often asked is, how important would you say are linking context with the internal and external issues that affect the business and understanding where these mix and link to other areas of the management system? The context is really important as it links the workers and other interested parties to what the organisation does, it may want, or what it needs to do in the future. That is what the context is trying to deliver. And when you look at that, you can then understand why a lot of organisations would choose to put some documented information together to aid its own processes, but also to aid the assessment process. The whole of the management standard is looking about delivering the policy commitments within the organisation as defined by the ISO requirements for policy. And there are commitments in there in terms of protecting workers and preventing ill health, and including mental health and well-being, not just physical accidents, but looking at legal and other requirements, delivering the strategy, protecting workers, controlling operations, providing resources, use of technology as appropriate, operational control, emergency preparedness and consideration, all linked to risk assessments and the various process controls that then come from those. A question that's again often asked is, how would you create and demonstrate a risk and opportunities register? Well, it can be as straightforward as a simple table. However, there's no specific method defined in the ISO standard. However, it's common to see the table. Levels of detail can depend on the organisation and the resources within the organisation, and a register can provide a useful prompt for review and updates to indicate where an organisation and why an organisation is taking action or making changes or implementing controls. So here are a few examples of various assessment models that can be applied and are commonly applied throughout various different organisations. But this ISO standard doesn't specify these as a requirement. This is down to the organisation to identify these areas. So external factors obviously could be the environment in which you're working, the legal and political various things, a PESTEL analysis, and however you juggle the letters of the word PESTEL around, it should cover basically the same things. Internal factors could be the strategy of the organisation, the structure, resources, the management style and culture of the organisation, the shared values, the skills, and the resources and systems that are available within that particular organisation. All these things can influence the context and have an impact on the management system and its interrelationship. So in terms of clause 4, title being context of the organisation, it talks about understanding the organisation, its context, what does the organisation do and why, understanding the needs of and expectations of workers. It underlines workers as the core interested party in relation to occupational health and safety management systems. There are obviously numerous other interested parties, but workers we're trying to protect the workers, the people within the organisation from risks of that operational activity, etc. And obviously within clause 4, it's about defining the scope of applicability of the management system. And there are some general requirements using the Plan, Do, Check, Act methodology and framework that we'll be familiar with. Just as an example of how ISO 45001 can interrelate and have common elements with other ISO management standards, including 9001, the context, and 14001, which is the environmental standard. You can see context and the framework of Annex SL is a common element throughout. And understanding those is applicable to all disciplines within the ISO family of management systems. The emphasis within 45001 is on leadership, not just management of. It's looking at to enhance participation and engagement with workers and interested parties, but obviously provide leadership and worker participation, demonstrate leadership and commitment, defining the policy that must be authorised and available as documented information within the standards, and they're generally authorised and approved by a senior leader within the organisation. It's demonstrating the organisation's commitment to do this well. And within the ISO standard requirements, there's a commitment to safe and healthy working conditions by the prevention of work-related injury and ill health. So it's a preventative standard, not a reactive standard. And it doesn't just include physical accidents, it includes mental health and well-being and psychological risks as well. There's a requirement there as well to look at organisational roles and responsibilities so that people understand what they're responsible for, what their accountabilities are, etc. That needs to be available with it as documented information, so that could be in form of an org chart, job descriptions, etc. And there's lots of ways of demonstrating how that's communicated, the organisational roles and responsibilities throughout the organisation, because it's no good holding somebody responsible for something if that hasn't been effectively communicated to them. They need to understand what their role is and how they can contribute to the overall requirements of the management standard. And obviously consultation and participation. So it isn't just a top-down dictatorial approach in terms of the management system, and as can be applied to all management systems, I think communications here and that engagement with the various interested parties is a key element for effective delivery and enhancement, because over time people then can contribute, they can make suggestions, they can look at different ways of working, etc., 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 to drive forward improvement and reduce risk within an organisation. And the same can be said for environmental management, quality management, and lots of other disciplines within the ISO range of management standards. The consultation and participation element is looking at creating a culture and mechanisms and removal of barriers, allowing time and resources to enable people to perform their tasks and their roles effectively, the information, communication and training. And it also requires non-management participation to identify hazards and controls. So it isn't just something whereby the management of an organisation go out and do risk assessments. Workers in the operational fields and aspects of an organisation should be integrated into that process and be able to provide input, because the people that know how to do something very well are the people that are doing it day in, day out. So it's all fundamentally to ensure that engagement and that participation of workers to make the management system as effective as possible and to enable it to develop. In the planning elements, both in section 6 and the operational controls should look to eliminate risk, but before you can eliminate the risk, you need to be able to identify it. So this is why we mentioned the two elements there, both planning and operational control. Hierarchy of control, elimination, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, and PPE. And as you can see, PPE is at the bottom of the triangle, which with potential to be the least effective method of control, because PPE generally only protects individual workers if they wear and use the PPE appropriately. So its effectiveness can be greatly influenced by how it's used. And obviously, if you've got lots of people having to wear PPE, that can be very variable across the group, but it could also be very restrictive in terms of communication potential and various things like that. So applying the hierarchy of control is a key requirement of how you consider planning the operational controls after identifying the various risks. Planning is about defining actions required to successfully achieve OHS outcomes and objectives. It's about addressing risks and opportunities and meeting legal and compliance obligations whilst engaging with workers. Meeting legal and compliance obligations can be viewed where they exist as the minimum standard that must be achieved. A lot of organisations strive to go above and beyond that requirement. It's not just about meeting the legal requirement. In terms of the planning clauses, in clause 6, we talk about actions to address risk and opportunities. So that's hazard identification and the assessment of risks and opportunities, and these shall be maintained as documented information. You need to determine legal and other requirements, and that again must be retained as documented information. So that's looking at what legal obligations apply to you and your organisation. That can only be done which links directly to applicable hazards and identification of, as if there's a control in relation to, shall we say, using natural gas within the UK, there's a requirement for anyone serving that equipment to be suitably competent. But if you don't use natural gas and there's no requirement within your organisation of using natural gas and mains gas, then there wouldn't be a legal obligation applicable to your organisation. So it's about making things applicable to your organisation, not just, oh, well, there is a legal requirement somewhere. And this is where any changes can be critically important to keep this information up to date, because obviously as risk assessments change, as operations change, machinery, plant and equipment or methods can change, then determination of legal and other requirements is a key requirement there, linking that to make sure that things align and the management system in its entirety then delivers what you need. And one of the things within that determination of legal and other requirements is how it applies to you. So when you're looking at those, so it's not just identifying the piece of legislation, it's also looking at the broader element. So what does that mean to us? How is that going to apply to us? How does that impact us as an organisation? Which is a key element there. In addition to the compliance and legal and other requirements, the organisation may well set occupational health and safety objectives with plans to achieve them. So it's not just about setting an objective, I don't know, same as, I don't know, a 50% reduction in, let's say, lost time accidents could be an objective. But just setting that as an objective doesn't enable you to deliver it. So you've then got to document and implement plans for how you're going to deliver that achievement and what you're going to do and the timescales in which. And all those objectives need to be considered as SMART objectives, you know, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time framed. So always remember the SMART acronym when you're looking at objectives. The risk assessment process is a core function within the organisation because, as we've said, your compliance obligations are linked to risks that you're exposing your workers to, and without undertaking risk assessments and hazard identification and linking that to appropriate operational controls, etc., this is the body of the management system in terms of keeping it alive and keeping it functioning effectively as you go forward. So obviously this is all part of the Plan, Do, Check, Act process in relation to management standards, and risk assessment is part of the planning of the operation. So in clause 7, the standards look at resources, competence as it applies to external workers, including contractors, as well as direct employees, etc. So this is why the word workers is used as opposed to employees, because employees doesn't include external contractors. It also looks and can link to the procurement process, because if you're going to appoint a contractor to undertake some specialist work on your behalf, or as a direct working resource for your organisation, then they may have to have these competencies there. And as I mentioned before, an example could be gas safe as required within the UK. Awareness talks about including the ability and the culture for people to remove themselves from work situations that present an imminent and serious threat to life or health. So everybody should have the right to stop the work to prevent undue risk and exposure to hazards within the workplace. And it's important that people are aware of that within the various training processes, induction processes, and it sets the tone for the organisation and enhances the culture of the organisation. In 7.4, it looks at communication. These clauses have been expanded to include external, internal communications, and various controls and stuff should be retained as documented information. So how you receive an external concern, how you receive an internal concern, etc. There may be processes, procedures, and all the various things that can go with that, including software, reporting apps, all that type of thing in terms of communication. Communication is a thread that runs through every element of the standard, and effective communication. Not only that communication, but obviously using that and learning lessons and using it appropriately to get better as time and systems mature. And documented information is the phrase that's used. It's an all-inclusive term, so it can include a range of media. It's not just about hard copy, paper-based information. It can include IT, software, programming, etc., because those versions of IT may actually control the process. So it may be a control program for an operation. It may be a control program for a piece of plant or equipment. So those version controls can be equally important to be controlled as part of the operational control of an organization, because a change in that, shall we say, IT software could actually make something defunct within the process or eliminate a step within the process, which to that organization could be critical in terms of safety and risk. So it's about integrating all these things as part of the management system. Organizations need to plan and implement control and maintain processes that need to be maintained in relation to its compliance obligations to manage the risks effectively as identified and to meet the requirements of the OHS system. There's a general requirement for maintaining documented information in relation to those controls, so that could be safe systems of work, it could be work instructions, it could be whatever the phrase used within your organization, standard operating procedures, etc. Could also include hazard reporting and eliminating hazards. It could also be the management of change, how things are controlled when planned change is occurring, but also unplanned changes. And I'll say weather conditions, for example, how you consider that, or change in provider from one type of subcontractor to another. All these things have to be included and considered within the operational control elements of the standards. And like I say, it includes general requirements, contractors and outsourcing requirements. And also within Section 8, there's the requirement to look at emergency preparedness and responses. So that means that risk assessment should also consider normal operations, emergency operations and fires and events of that nature, but also abnormal. So infrequent events such as plants get shut down for maintenance or whatever. So although they are planned, they only happen occasionally. It's not the norm. So it can change the risks and it can change the dynamic of how an operation is controlled. So when you're looking at risk assessments, the risk assessment should cover all those three elements in terms of the various requirements. Section 9 is obviously the performance evaluation, and having carried out the activities in Clause 8, it's time to monitor, measure, analyse and evaluate OHS performance, and in Section 9 of the standard, this is where that's delivered. So monitoring and measurement requirements are defined there, and some of those should be retained as documented information. An important one there is the evaluation of compliance. So we identified in Section 6 the compliance requirements that would be applicable to your organisation and how they apply to your organisation. That then has to be confirmed as those controls are actually effectively being delivered, and that compliance evaluation is the process, how we confirm that process. So it's basically confirming that the safe system of work is delivering the controls appropriate, and let's say, you know, the monitoring and measurement of vibration, etc., and the actual exposure to that is confirmed. So that would also, although it would be occupational health controls, it would also confirm the evaluation of compliance in relation to the appropriateness of the controls within the organisation. So it's that checking process within the plan, do, check, X cycle. There's also a requirement for internal audits, the general requirement in 921, but also in 922, the internal audit program, which must be documented, and also then the delivery of that program is a requirement. And 9.3 is a management review process. The reason I put word changes there, that reference to word changes is in reference to the previous standard that was used internationally, which was 18,001. Just for clarity, 18,001 no longer exists, and there were significant changes to the wording throughout the standard, not just in management review, but the whole structure was revised when it was introduced as an ISO standard. So 18,001 no longer exists and is not applicable for certification within organisations. And last but not least, there is also the final chapter, which is improvement. And the management standards look at continual improvement, not just occasional improvement, but continual improvement over a period of time. So it uses the word continual because that's different to continuous. So continual, if you had to draw continual improvement as a graph, it would be like a profile of a set of stairs. So it would show the steps of where you've made improvements over time, whereas continuous would be a diagonal line going across a graph to show that all the time there was some improvement process being undertaken. So the ISO standards look at continual improvement. They also look at obviously incidents and non-conformity and corrective action. So incidents need to be recorded, non-conformity needs to be investigated and understood. A key element of 45,001 is worker participation in the investigation process and the reviewing of accident performance and incidents, etc. Because as the workers are directly engaged in the various operations, they can be very well placed to assist in the investigation processes, not expected to undertake it purely on their own, but with support of the organisation and the leadership and the various roles. It is important that worker participation is a key element of that improvement process and that investigation process. And if you adopt all the other clauses of the standard effectively, then continual improvement should be a natural output of the management system, and it should enhance performance by reducing risk. It should promote a culture of support and worker participation in improvements. It should lead to effective communication and retaining of documented information so you can evidence that both in terms of to assessments, to other people within the organisation so lessons can be learned, and potentially to third parties, interested parties from a legal perspective, because there may be a legal requirement also for documented information and records. So that's a very quick whistle-stop tour of the ISO 45001 structure. And we'll now revert to some questions and answers. All being well. Got a couple of questions in relation to the transcript available. As I said at the start, the presentation and recording will be available within the next few days to all registered participants. I can't see any more questions that have been answered in the chat box. There's a question here about a NEBOSH certificate. Do NEBOSH certificates ensure that you can follow the steps to implement 45001? Yes, it will give you a very good grounding in understanding the processes in relation to occupational health and safety systems, but it's not a defined requirement within the standard itself. But it can be very useful, as with any training, can be very useful to people to understand how the process of risk management is applied within organisations. And NEBOSH is one of many organisations that can deliver those types of training requirements. But training itself may not deliver competence. It's for an organisation to define its own competence requirements for what it needs. It's not a mandatory requirement within ISO 45001. I don't think there are any more questions that I can see that have been asked. If you have any questions, just for information, by all means, you can email me directly. I'm Terry Fisher. My email is terry.fisher@nqa.com, and just put 45001 webinar in the header, and then at least I'll have a clue as to where that needs coming from in relation to any questions you've got. I would encourage questions throughout and various things, because one of the things it does do is helps us identify the market's training needs, but also helps us interpret client requirements as we're going forward. So it's very useful for us to be asked questions, etc., as we go. We may use those questions and develop webinars, etc., based on those questions. I know in previous years, when the 45001 was being introduced and its migration from 18001 was being done, then we used a lot of the questions to develop webinars and various things to help people understand the difference of in the changes. For those of you who are interested in training and development, we've got a link below within the presentation, which covers 45003, which is an ISO standard, a guidance standard in terms of occupational health and well-being. So it's not just looking at accidents directly. And this is a guidance standard in support of ISO 45001. The offers there that we've got in our spring deal for e-learning include sustainability, environment, and a lot of other topics that you may find very useful as a range of organisations out there in the real world. So by all means, have a look at those, and there are some discounts applied as part of that bundle. Yeah, I'm just reviewing the questions very quickly. No, there's no other questions been asked. So if that's basically the end of the webinar from my perspective, like I say, I'll give you all my email address should you have any direct questions. Just for clarity, I can't answer questions about particular organisations, as that would be regarded as consultation. What we can do is clarify points within the management standard requirements. So we can't consult, so we can't tell you how to deliver these things, but we can clarify and confirm the requirements of an ISO standard and how it will be assessed, etc., and support you in that respect. But we can't answer individual questions. That is for your organisation to determine, and you may do that with the aid of a consultant or other additional external resources or internal resources. That's entirely up to you. Hopefully you found this very useful. I look forward to working with you in the future. For those of you who are our current customers, and those of you who are potentially new customers, like I say, if you have anything that we can help you with, I'll help you with that. There is a question just come in. Is it a requirement to have a health and safety rep? There are some statutory requirements within the UK in relation to worker representation, etc. But it doesn't necessarily mean unionised sites, but it is about worker participation, and you can have various committees and various things going on in relation to that, but it doesn't necessarily define unionised sites or non-unionised sites. So yes, it is about that participation and those requirements, etc., and encouraging that throughout your organisation. How you do that can be individual to the organisation structures, etc. So thank you all very much for your time. I hope you found it useful. And as I say, if NQA can be an assistance in any way, shape or form, don't hesitate to get in touch with myself or via the website to our marketing team and our operations and support services for training and development, etc. So I hope you all have a good afternoon or whatever time of day it is, wherever you're joining us from, and keep safe and well.